Perfumes or aftershaves, learned this week, are a mixture of tones that create a unique smell. You know, these tones, they make up the essence of the perfume. So there are high tones and middle tones and low tones. The high tones are what you first smell. This is where guys usually like, you know, when the girl just uses the perfume, it just like hits them in the face. It's the smell you first get. Those are the high tones. Those are just right there on the tip of the smell. There are medium tones, which create a little depth to the high tones, so it's not like you're just smelling a flower all day long. And then there are the low tones that they sit around and they linger, and that's what you smell hours later. Each of these are a mixture of, man, I went online, there's like 4 bajillion different little smelly things all mixed together to make the wide variety of perfumes and aftershaves that we enjoy so much. Each tone is important to the essence of the perfume. Because if you remove the high tones, you don't get that smell right off the bat. If you remove the low tones, then by the point that the high tones have started to sour, you get it. You suddenly no one wants to be around you. So perfumes are important that they are mixed well. They make up the essence of that perfume. In a few weeks as we said, is Easter. It's Resurrection Sunday, where Jesus, after being in the ground 3 days, rose again triumphantly over sin and death. Now, originally, when I was starting to study this series, I planned about 3 weeks. So we'd start this week, do next week, and finish up in Easter, and then go into a new series. And I started reading Matthew chapter 26 and Matthew chapter 27, and I wanted to really focus on the last 24 hours of Jesus' life before he died on the cross. And as I read and studied, things started sticking out to me. I realized I couldn't do this in 3 weeks. It started to get bigger, and I was stumbling across powerful statements and imagery just in 2 chapters of Matthew that make up the essence of Jesus. See, Jesus is our Passover lamb. He is our good shepherd. He is our condemnation. He is our silent substitution. He is our new covenant. He is our willing sacrifice, are just some of the topics and some of the imagery that I started to find just in these 2 chapters. So the last 24 hours of Jesus' life, as recorded by Matthew, we have these 7 topics. See, as tones are to the essence of perfume, this imagery is going to make up the essence of Jesus. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to start in Matthew chapter 26, and we're going to talk about the essence, the Passover lamb. Matthew chapter 26. Now, to do a study like this, we're going to have to try to create some of the imagery of why this is so significant. How many of you guys have heard of Passover? I think most of us here in some way has heard of the event Passover. Not all of us know exactly what it is, but we have heard of it. And we've heard it talked about. We know it has something to do with Israel and, and Hebrews and Jews. And if we think about it, we're like, it probably has something to do with Egypt. And we think there were some plagues involved. And so we have this idea. Well, Passover was a feast that was to be celebrated to remind the nation of Israel of God's deliverance from the nation of Egypt. Like a lot of Jewish holidays, they can be summarized like this. They tried to kill us. They failed. Let's eat. Egypt tried to kill us. Well, they failed. So let's eat about it. It's really most of the Jewish holidays. If you look at it, you can see that. See, Passover was the day that the angel of death passed over the doors and homes that had the blood of a spotless lamb painted on the posts of the door. The homes without blood on their door lost their firstborn sons. It was the last and final plague that guaranteed deliverance from the nation of Egypt. This feast marked the beginning of a feast called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where the Jewish nation, their homes, would try to remove all the leaven, the yeast, from their house, because yeast pictured sin. It was an image of sin. So the idea was to try to remove this. Now, back in those times, that was practically impossible to do because it was everywhere. But they still tried. I mean, we're talking like Q-tips, trying to get it all out of the home. And the imagery is sin is everywhere. It's everywhere. So back to the Passover. On the 10th of Nisan, they would find the animal. They would pick out a spotless lamb. On the 14th, they would kill the animal, cook it, and then that evening, between the 14th and 15th, they would celebrate Passover. I say 14th and 15th because there's a little confusion, as we'll find out, that how the holiday plays out. And some say it has to be over exactly at 12, but then it gets confusing with how some people do the days. It's good old fun. If you want to know greater detail, I encourage you to study Exodus chapter 12 and 13. Now let's look at, so that's what we're going to bring in. Now check out Matthew chapter 26. We're going to start at verse 12. Matthew chapter 26, verse 12. Just to give you a little bit more background, this is, we're going to start, in pouring this ointment on my body. This is when a lady had come in and broken and pretty much poured a very valuable container of perfume over Jesus. Jesus is explaining, in pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now we arrive roughly 24 hours before the death of Jesus. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house and with my disciples.' And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover." Some believe that this meal that Jesus is eating was a feast that happened the day before Passover, which was sort of to celebrate the firstborn son. Because of the nature of how the 10th plague played out and the dedication to the Lord of the firstborn sons, the day before, the firstborn son would fast all day. And then, could you imagine if you were like 13 and 14 years old as a boy and you couldn't eat all day long? Lathan, how often do you eat, buddy? A lot, exactly it, okay? So here's this boy, hasn't eaten the whole day, and they're like, I mean, pretty much if they had pizza, they'd just gone, just scarfed down like 4 of them. So they'd have this feast for him so he could eat the day before. Some believe that this was the feast that was celebrated here, but I want to say I don't believe so, because first day of unleavened bread, which Passover opened up into the week of unleavened bread. Where will you have us prepare to eat the Passover? Jesus says, "My time is at hand, I will keep the Passover." And the disciples did as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover. We got it? This is not a feast to the firstborn sons, because that would mean there's a lot of wrong here. So, they are celebrating the Passover. Let's continue reading in verse 20. It says, "When it was evening, he reclined at the table with the 12. And as they were eating, he said, 'Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me.' And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, 'Is it I, Lord?' And he answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, and woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who would betray him, answered, "Is it I, Rabbi?" And he said to him, "You have said so." Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." So during the Passover feast, I was doing a lot of research on the Passover Seder, which is what it's called. It means sort of order of service. And I found a lot of sites, and I was going to actually bring and get the Haggadah book, which they actually go through, but there's like 50 different Haggadah books, and I'm like, forget it. So I went to the trusty, the Haggadah and the Steps of a Seder for Dummies. Not that you guys are the dummies, but I am the dummy who needs this. So there is a 15-step process to how they celebrate the Seder, the Passover meal. We're going to read them. You guys ready? Good. All right. So step one is the Kadesh. They are to fill your cup with the first glass of wine or grape juice, lift the cup, say the Kiddush, sanctification over the fruit of the vine and over the whole day, and drink, leaning to the left. Tradition says to fill the cup to the brim, but also that you shouldn't get drunk, meaning don't use the wine glasses. Probably use the wine glasses if you so decided to use the wine or grape juice, which is pretty much just fruit of the vine. It can be used interchangeably. Yeah. Then there was a urkatz, which is a hand washing with no blessing. And so the second step is they would wash their hands, but they would not pray over this part. Now you guys can go online and look at a lot more details. We're going to just work our way through here. There is the karpas, which is eating the green vegetable. And the first bite of food people get is the karpas, the green vegetable, symbol of spring and renewal, which they dip in salt water. Purifying tears is what this symbolizes before eating. Apart from its ritual symbolism, karpas serves as an hors d'oeuvre, whatever. Thank you, hors d'oeuvre, thank you. I am not French, okay. It's French, right? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. All right. So they encourage you to eat plenty of this because it's going to be a while before you get to eat. So, all right. Then it's the yakatz, which is breaking the matzah. And now the Seder leader, whoever it is who's hosting the event, picks up, there's 3 squares of unleavened bread. Okay? And he picks up the middle of the 3, breaks it in half, and then puts the smaller piece back in. And depending on the tradition and which Haggadah they're doing, they can sometimes hide it and let the kids go find it, or sometimes they can go and put it at a corner of the table and the kids have to try to steal it from the host. And so it's a little game they do with the kids. So it just depends on how the family runs that. Then they tell the story, which is the Magid, and usually this is the longest of the 15 steps, and they tell the Exodus narrative. So this is where they read through the story of the Exodus and how they escaped. And the youngest kid in the group asks questions. They ask 4 questions that revolve around this basic one, is why is this night different than all the other nights? And so with the story, they answer this chief question of why this event is so important. This is in a lot of ways very similar to the 4th of July for the United States of America. I mean, it's really what it is. I mean, it's a little different because of the religious nature of this, but really, how did we get our independence? Why is the 4th of July a big deal? Why do we shoot off fireworks into the sky and have barbecues on this day? So it's the same idea. They're asking the same question. Why is this day different? It's the day we got freedom from Egypt. It is their 4th of July. So they answer this. Then they drink. Here the second glass of wine is poured, but you're not allowed to drink it yet. You traditionally dip a finger into the wine and transfer 10 drops of wine to your plate. 10 signifying the 10 plagues of Egypt. And then after a singing and praising, you then drink the second cup. Then the next step is the rakza, which is hand washing with a blessing. And it's time to wash your hands again, but this time you do say a blessing over this. Then there's the matzi, which is the blessing before eating the matzah. I can only do so many pronunciations of this. I am sorry if you are Jewish. I do not mean to just completely butcher your language. I am. Okay, so this is where they then raise the matzah and they recite 2 blessings over the bread. The regular matzi blessing and one specifically mentioning the mitzvah, which is the Jewish commandment of eating the matzah at Passover. Step 8, you eat the matzah. Blessing said, everyone breaks off a piece of the matzah and eats it. Remind you of anything that we read earlier? Jesus broke it after blessing and said, okay, just to put that in your mind. Then there's the maror, which is eating the bitter herb. And it's this is what they say. It's perfect Jewish irony that just as your stomach is starting to growl, you have to eat the bitter herbs. And the bitter herbs symbolizes the bitterness of slavery. And so they dip it in. They dip it in and they have to eat this bitter herb. Then there's the koresh, which is a halal sandwich, which back in the day when they would sacrifice, though they actually had the sacrifice of the lamb, the sandwich would have the lamb. Now it does not, since they no longer do sacrifices. And so the sandwich is made of the matzah, the koroset, the bitter herb. Then they eat the meal, which is good. Step 12, it's the safun, which is the last food that is officially eaten at the Seder, is a piece of the fakomen matzah, which symbolizes the Passover sacrifice. And this has to be, that's what I say, traditionally it's supposed to be done by midnight. And then they bless after the food, and Jewish meals always conclude with a blessing, and this meal is no different. And this is where they then pour another cup of wine. And then I think that was they believe that's number 4. I skipped another one in there. And then they sing praises. And then depending on how it is, step 15 is sort of up to the family. So there's dancing, celebrating, going to bed, whatever they decide. So that is the Seder. Now, why do I say all this? You're like, Pastor, you're not even preaching. You're reading us a book from dummies. And we'll see why. Go back to Matthew. So traditionally, in the Passover, celebrating the Passover, they would recline to the left. Because as slaves, you were not allowed to recline at the table. Look at verse 20. When it was evening, he reclined at the table with the 12. And as they were eating, so they're now reclining and eating. Verse 23, he who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. Is that the bitter herbs? There's the dipping together. There's this. So far we have the reclining. They do that at the Passover. They eat at the Passover. They eat sort of communally with the dipping his hands in the dish. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took the bread, after blessing it, broke and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." There's so much symbolism wrapped up in this holiday, and here Jesus is. In the midst of it, takes a piece of unleavened bread and says, "Take, eat, this is my body." As you know in 1 Corinthians, this is my body which is broken for you. And if we think about this, he's now taken a piece of unleavened bread, free from leaven, free from sin. He says, "This is my body. This is my sinless body, which I am breaking and will break for you." The disciples at the time would have no idea what he's talking about. I mean, Jesus often talked in parables. We don't even know what this means. But now looking back, here's Jesus taking this and adding so much symbolism to this Passover meal. This is my body. Breaks it. He was celebrating the Passover meal.
Each year, Christians throughout the world celebrate Holy Week, the most significant period in the Christian calendar. Holy Week commemorates the last week of the life of Jesus Christ, his crucifixion, and his resurrection from the tomb. During this same time each year, Jews around the world celebrate Passover, the most significant festival in the Jewish calendar. The Jewish holiday of Passover commemorates the redemption of the ancient Israelites from bondage in Egypt after being slaves for 300 years to Pharaoh. The Bible records the Lord's command to celebrate this first Passover. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, Speak ye unto all of the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb without blemish, a male of the first year, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood, and strike it on the doorposts of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. For 3,500 years, Jews have celebrated Passover, and have used the symbolism of the meal to remember the captivity and redemption of their fathers, and to look forward to the Messianic age and their own final redemption. Jesus himself, a Jew, likewise used the symbolism of the Passover meal to teach his disciples about his mission, as he prepared them to understand the spiritual redemption that would come from his suffering and death. Just as the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorposts of the homes of faithful Israelites had saved them from the power of the destroying angel, so the blood of the Lamb of God, shed for all on Calvary's cross, would save all who would come unto Christ from the power of sin and death. Though it is difficult to know exactly how the Last Supper took place, the Gospel writers refer to several Passover symbols during the meal and discourse that followed. Understanding this sacred holiday in its Jewish context will help us appreciate the Last Supper and the Savior's redemption on this Passover night. Tradition tells us that the day was Thursday, the first day of the Passover feast. As the evening approached, Jesus and his disciples gathered in a large upper room on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. His disciples had made preparations beforehand, and the table was set with all of the necessary elements for the Passover meal. According to Jewish tradition, a roasted lamb would be served as the main dish in remembrance of the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of the homes, which protected their ancestors from the destroying angel. Alongside it, bitter herbs representing the bitterness of slavery, and a mixture of chopped apples and nuts called haroset, representing the mortar used by slaves to build the wonders of Egypt. Salt water was used to recall the salty tears shed by the Israelites in slavery. Into the salt water they dipped greens, such as parsley, representing springtime, the season of Passover, the season of hope. Central to the Passover feast was the unleavened bread, or matzah, which reminded the disciples of the haste with which Israel left Egypt, their ancestors not having even enough time to allow their bread to rise. This was the bread which Christ blessed and broke and gave to his disciples, saying, Take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. After the same manner also he took the cup, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do in remembrance of me. In instituting this sacramental emblem, Jesus used one of the 4 cups of wine which was consumed during each Passover meal, each cup representing a unique aspect of God's promise to redeem Israel. During the meal, the question was asked by the youngest member, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" Whereupon the story of the redemption of Israel from captivity was told. Passover is different from all other nights. But this Passover night was truly different, for on this night, Christ would redeem all his children from the slavery of sin and the bondage of death. After completing this symbolic meal, and when they had sung a hymn, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Mount of Olives into a garden called Gethsemane. Jesus' atoning journey had begun. The true Passover lamb had come.
I thought that was a good summary. Just a couple of thoughts for those who catch things like this. They said 300 years in slavery. Some of you are like, wait, I thought they were in there for like 430 years. You're accurate, but if you remember, they weren't slaves right away. Also, they said that Israelites built the wonders of Egypt. I do not believe they built the wonders, like wonders of the world in Egypt. That was actually before that. And lastly, if you guys remember them mentioning the cups of wine, there are traditionally 4 cups that they 4 cups of wine that they drink. And they explain it like this. God uses 4 expressions of redemption in describing our exodus from Egypt and our birth as a nation. The first cup of wine signifies the expression, "I will take you out," which God told to the nation of Israel. The second one is God saying, "I will save you." Second expression that God uses. The third expression that God uses is, "I will redeem you." And then the fourth is, "I will take you as a nation." So verse 27 of Matthew chapter 26, and it says, "And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it with you new. Drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom.' And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives." Many scholars believe that, just sort of in the timing, this cup of wine would have been number 3. Believe I got this one right. But after supper, after they've eaten the meal, so you think about the meal, around step 13 or so, Jewish meals always conclude with a blessing, and then after that blessing, they then to drink. It might have actually been cup 4. Like I said, I'm still figuring this out. But this cup, so some believe that it happened at number 3 with the idea of "I will redeem you, I will buy you." But really the imagery is sort of carried all the way through. Jesus Christ buying, rescuing, delivering the nation of Israel from the bondage of slavery. And Jesus Christ's blood buys our freedom from the slavery of sin. So here's Jesus again, adding so much depth and imagery to the Passover meal where his body is broken for them. And the second one is the cup, the fruit of the vine, where his blood was shed for forgiveness of sins. My last thought that really drives home the essence of Jesus as our Passover lamb. I'm going to say there's a little debate on this last one. It sort of seems like the letter of John and the letter of Matthew sort of disagree with each other about how Passover plays out. So let me read to you some of the verses in John chapter 13. Now remember, in In Matthew chapter 26, they were celebrating Passover. They were celebrating Passover. It was the beginning of Matthew seems to be very specific that was Passover day, and they were celebrating the Passover. Now, John 13, this takes place after that meal that Jesus had with the disciples. This happens after the Passover meal. And here in John chapter 13, now verse 1, I'm going to be flying through here, but verse 1 says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him." So seems like it's happening before the feast of the Passover. Okay, verse 28. Then, this is much later in the narrative. This is actually chapter 18 of John chapter 18, verse 28. It says, "Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning." And so traditionally, it says many believe that it was like early Friday morning. "They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover." And so many of the Pharisees did not want to enter into a Gentile governor's house for fear that they would then be, defiled, and they then could not celebrate the Passover, seeming to be on Friday instead of on Thursday. And then John chapter 18, verse 38 and 40, a little further, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. And so once again, in John, it seems like Passover's Friday. Are you tracking with me here? Matthew seems to say it happened on Thursday. John seems to say it's on Friday. Well, I guess that means the Bible isn't true. I just want to say that. Some people like to jump on this stuff. This stuff can be answered. Now it was, in John chapter 19, verse 14, "Now it was the day of the preparation of Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, 'Behold your king.'" Verse 31, "Since it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away." You can study Jewish high days or Sabbaths, but sometimes there seems to be like a double Sabbath that would roll on depending on how the Feast of Unleavened Bread correlated with the other days, because they based their calendar off the moon. A lot of things, you can go Wikipedia that one. They can sort of seem like they double up in Sabbaths, like high day Sabbaths. They can end up with like 2 Sabbaths in a row. And so here is Friday, like we would think of. Here it is Friday, where now they say, okay, so Passover's coming. It is a Sabbath tomorrow, so we cannot touch the body of Jesus. Let's break his legs now, so then we do not have to be defiled, over the Sabbath and have to work, etc. And so that's where they went up, and then they found Jesus had already passed. And so all this John seems to emphasize that there is a Passover on Friday. And Matthew seems to say there's the Passover on Thursday. How do those work together? I mean, was Jesus a lawbreaker by doing all this a day early? Is somebody really confused on what day of the week it is? They had daylight savings time and they were gone. I mean, what is going on here? So Jesus seemed to have the Passover meal on Thursday night. And yet Passover was on Friday. How can we explain this? There's really 2 lines of thought, just to get you to think. No one knows 100% for certain. Which one is it? Now there's a graphic right here. You guys are like, I don't even see any of this. That's okay. What you have here is this is our clock right here. Here's Thursday. That happens from 12 a.m. to 11:59, right? Our day's 24 hours. It starts in the middle of the night and goes to the middle of the night, right? Okay. Occasionally, the American government, they steal an hour from us, but then they give it back to us later. We let them do that for some reason. As you can tell, I lost some sleep last night. Let me tell you, it's doing a doozy. All right, Friday right here is now 12 to 12. So traditionally, we believe Jesus celebrated the Passover right here, and then Friday was the trial, and then he was crucified. But in typical fashion, there's a Judean Jewish calendar, and there's a Galilean Jewish calendar as well. They even treat days differently sometimes, depending on who you talked to. So some believe that the Galilean calendar actually, Nisan the 14th and 15th, they run their days differently. I'm going to have you check that on your own. Like I said, I'm not going to try to explain it. And then a Judean calendar where they start their day differently as well. So the Galileans, they start their day at sort of 5 in the morning our time and end, around 5 o'clock the next day, and they go. And that's how one person says, okay, this is very easily how the days would have lined up. All right. The Judean calendar, they start their day at sunset and goes through the end, which is why, so John is writing from a Judean Jewish perspective. That's guaranteed. Matthew, some believe, is written from a Galilean perspective. That's one solution. There's, I think, a much easier one, but just if you ever come across it. So oftentimes, since the Jewish people had been spread out amongst the world, when they would base their calendars, it took 2 witnesses looking at the moon to figure out if it's a full moon or not, and based on that, they could build their calendar off of that. Occasionally, they would have disagreements over the moon. I don't think it's a full moon. Well, I think it does. Well, I don't think it is. Well, we have to have 2 witnesses, and there's only 2 of us. Rock, paper, scissors. And instead of doing that, what they would do is like, okay, well, it could be today, and it's probably tomorrow. So suddenly, they're like, okay, suddenly the calendars get a little wonky because, well, it could be Thursday, and it could be Friday as the beginning of the month. And just to make sure that, and then they'd have to travel back, and sometimes they would get delayed. And so the Sanhedrin, who was ruling over Israel at the time, would sort of give leeway days in between. So Nisan the 10th could also be the 11th, just in case news didn't get out far enough to like the Galileans. So the Galileans were probably functioning from a completely different calendar than the Judeans were. And Jesus was Galilean. So here's Jesus from Galilee functioning with a slightly different calendar than it. So here's Matthew. He's just writing from a Galilean, Judean. He goes in, Jesus is like, it's time to celebrate the Passover. Okay, they celebrated Passover. No one has any issue with this because all the Jews realize that when you're traveling in and out and you're trying to get word out of when the calendars actually started, there's going to be a little bit of discrepancy. It's not like us where we have these satellites in space and they like pinpoint the exact micrometer of the sun perfectly aligned with the earth. And then for some reason they have to add every random leap day, every 4 days, and random minutes every so often to reset the calendars. Even we don't get it right. Notice that? We don't get it right. And here they are with eyes. I think it's starting now. I don't think so. Okay. Their calendars gave a little bit. And it was perfectly okay with them. So there is no, Matthew doesn't agree with John. It's the same thing. But what's fun about the John perspective, which I really want to add, is here is Jesus. In the Judean calendar perspective, Jesus dies at the exact same time that the Judean Jews were killing their perfect lamb. And in the awesome wisdom of God, Jesus comes in functioning from one calendar, comes in, celebrates Passover, and adds this incredible depth to it. My body, perfect body broken for you, my blood gives you forgiveness of sins. And then the next day is offered up as our Passover lamb. Exodus chapter 12, verse 11 through 14 says, in this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you will eat it with haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast. The blood of Jesus is our sign that God's judgment will pass over us. So this event, Easter, the Lord's Supper, may it serve as a memorial for all generations of our Passover lamb.